Hi, I'm Lynx Vilden, sitting here in the forest with Mandela. I teach people how to let go of their modern mindset and discover the secrets and the gifts that nature has to offer when we stop trying to name and control it and just settle into our senses. I will be speaking with you about my connection to the earth, starting from my early childhood as an urban-born human being, and the revelations that I had as a young adult, discovering the ancient skills of our ancestors.
Welcome to The Trail Less Traveled, an adventure radio series and podcast dedicated to collecting stories and sounds from around the world in order to take you back to mankind's earliest form of entertainment, storytelling. Missoula, Montana is a mecca for outdoor enthusiasts, and each week we will bring you tales of adventure from both near and far, as well as information and inspiration and a few tunes to set the mood. You can subscribe to the podcast and learn about our international outreach projects at traillesstraveled.net. And now, here's your host, international expedition guide, conservationist, and yogi, Mandela.
This morning we're sitting in the forest just outside the Between the Rivers gathering, and I'm sitting with Lynx Vilden. Lynx is a hands-on wilderness living skills educator, the author of the book Return, A Journey Back to Living Wild. Lynx offers programs which teach people how to create the tools and gear necessary to live in the wilderness, as our Stone Age ancestors might have. She also offers projects which are the culmination of these teachings, where they go out into the wilderness with this gear for about 4 to 6 months. Lynx is sitting next to me. We did find a trickle of sunlight in the forest, and she's wearing a beautiful coat that she made herself out of coyote skin. And I want to just start by saying thank you so much, Lynx, for waking up early and agreeing to join me on the Trail Less Traveled.
Thank you. Yeah, it's my pleasure to be here this morning, this beautiful morning in the sunshine.
Where did you grow up, and how was adventure and wilderness living skills a part of your childhood?
Yeah, well, actually, I grew up in one of the largest cities in the world, in London. I was born there. My father was a Londoner, and my mother came from rural Sweden. They met on the boat between Sweden and the UK back in the early 60s. So, yeah, I have quite a contrast, I guess, in my upbringing. I spent, most of the year when I was going to school and so on in London in a school, and fortunately we lived close to a very large park. So I had a little bit of a wilderness out there, but I think it was really the summer times when we went to my grandparents' place in rural Sweden. They lived on the edge of a forest in a small village. That was where I had glimpses of wildness that I think all small children grow and thrive in conditions like that. During those times when we were out in the forest, everybody in Sweden more or less picks berries and harvests mushrooms, and I would go out with my grandparents and walk in the forest, and there's such a sense of otherworldliness there with all the moss-covered rocks, and there's a very strong culture of other beings in Scandinavia, so, it was always like, yes, where do the trolls and the elves and gnomes live? And then I'd go back to London, to my city world, and the sense of adventure probably was kindled in the forests of my maternal heritage and kept alive through the fact that I was able to escape to this giant park called Richmond Park, and it's on the edge of South London. And there were deer there and old trees and a giant fence that surrounded this park. It's about 11 miles if you walk the perimeter. So for a small kid, it was definitely a wilderness. We knew the places where you could get through the gaps in the fence. So sometimes it was our own private wilderness.
Lynx, let's talk some of your earliest introductions to making your own gear, making your own clothing, foraging, how that might have evolved into hunting, or maybe your first harvest.
Yeah, well, as a small child, I loved animals, and I still love animals. And I was very caught up in the protection of wildlife and domestic animals. And at about 16, I became vegetarian. And in those following 8 years, I actually had quite a decline in gut health because vegetarianism is not a diet that suits me well. I actually thrive much better on a more paleo-type diet with a lot of high proteins and so on. But I didn't like the idea that we domesticate animals just simply for our own use and for our own food. And hunting hadn't really even become an idea or a concept that I had even considered. But as I grew older and got into my early 20s, I realized that I would rather take responsibility for meat if I was going to eat it, or for the food that I was going to consume. And I realized that I didn't want to start to eat meat without having a relationship to it that felt equal somehow. So I asked a farmer who lived next door to my mom, she'd moved to the countryside by this time, to show me how to make a kill. And he showed me with a chicken, and we held it in our hands, and he helped me wring its neck. And it was such a powerful experience. And I ate that bird afterwards. And then I felt like, okay, if I can take this responsibility, then it's changed the whole game somehow. At that point, I started eating meat again, but not commercial meat. I tended to veer more towards understanding, like, where did this animal come from? How was it raised? And I wanted there to be some humanity in that. It's kind of, isn't it funny when we say we want things to be humane, that's still related to human. So anyway, I started to eat meat. All this sort of happened around the same time that I was introduced to primitive skills or ancestral skills, and it was in the US. I had moved to the US by this point of my life. And yeah, I found Tom Brown's Tracker School in New Jersey, and I had produced my first bow drill ember and learned some of these very simple techniques, like how to reverse wrap a small piece of cordage from natural fibers to make twine. And when I stepped out of that sweat lodge at the end of that week of my first skills class, literally that was the beginning of my life's journey. Essentially, that was what put everything together. I had been involved with art and music and theatre, so that had been my background. I had studied the performing arts, and I had gone to art school, and I liked to write, and I liked to play music and sing. Yeah, when I found the skills circuit, I put that all together. It was like, well, there's the missing link. This is what ties everything together. We have a species. We did all of those things, but within our tribe, within our clans. And so at that point, it was that big moment of revelation of, yeah, okay, now I know which path my life is going to take. You know, I was 24 years old. And yeah, I feel really, really blessed to have found my path at such a young age. And it's detoured here and there, but the general path has always been the same. It's more like it just grew stronger and broader in some way, with some little turn-offs here and there, but everything always coming back to this central theme of being connected to the earth and sharing and community. As my work and life has developed, I think the theme of connection with nature has taken on a little bit more of a like philosophical turn, where it's not just about the skills. In fact, I feel like when you practice the skills, it keeps your hands busy and it engages you in a way that you can let your mind be still.
That's the voice of Lynx Vilden. We're sitting in the forest just outside of the Between the Rivers gathering. Lynx is a hands-on wilderness living skills educator. Lynx, you mentioned skills, community. We're at a skills gathering right now. So for someone listening who's never heard of a skills gathering, could you tell us a little bit about this community and also what it means to you?
Yeah, when I was 27, I had my first and only child. And before she was 1 year old, I ended up at my first skills gathering. And it was Glass Buttes in Central Oregon. And I had already been at a Tom Brown school some years earlier, where I was sort of initiated into these ancient living skills. And so when I brought my daughter there, my little family, and saw what it was like to live in a kind of community where people were sharing these techniques, I was just like, wow, I want more of this. This is what I want more of in my life. And I don't want it just once a year for 1 week. I heard about some of the other gatherings that were starting or had been already established in the West. And of course, the grandfather gathering is Rabbit Stick Rendezvous. It happens in Idaho in September. And that had been going already for a few years. Dave Westcott had resurrected it. And so he was starting a new gathering in Arizona called Winter Count. So we ended up at this gathering too, the following winter time. And this was it. It was like, this is it. This is my clan. Here are my people. And from there, we went on to Rabbit Stick. And so it became kind of a circuit, as it is for many people here between the rivers too. It's like, okay, so now, 30 years later, there are multitudes of gatherings. And it just shows how thirsty people are for these skills, and for not just the skills, but the community that goes along with it. The community is really what holds everything together. It's that piece that is so vital that we're so lacking in our modern culture, where people are striving to be individual and unique and managing on their own. And it's like those things are sort of valued in our culture. It's like, well, I can do it alone. And that's not how we became successful as a species. It's through collaboration and cooperation that we actually can really thrive. I think that's really what we need more than anything else in the world today, is that collaboration and cooperation in order to move forward and to work together.
Lynx offers programs where she teaches people how to create the tools and gear necessary to live in the wilderness as our Stone Age ancestors might have. These programs then evolve into projects, which is a culmination of the teachings, where she prepares with these students for a few months, preparing the gear and the tools, and then going out into the wilderness for this hands-on living skills training. Lynx, I'd like to talk to you now about the evolution of the program into the project itself. What does it mean to make everything that you're going to be wearing, make everything that you're going to be using, not having the modern gear that we have in 2023 going back? How many thousands of years are we going back? What does it mean to be Stone Age? All of these details I'd love to talk to you about.
Yeah, well, I always like to start with the basics. And one of the things I've developed over the years is I actually try to take people out of their normal mindset. And in our normal mindset, in our Western culture, it's very linear and it's very analysis-based. So I want to actually take people away from their usual manner of thinking. And the way that I do that is I say, forget the names of everything. Forget the names. If we're sitting in a forest here, forget the names of the trees or the plants that you are surrounded by. Maybe you don't even know them, but a lot of people, they come with this basic knowledge of like, oh, this is this is a balsam plant, this is a pine tree. Oh, it's actually a ponderosa pine tree. Aren't I clever? I know the ponderosa, So I want people to come out of that place and just forget to name anything. I think that when we name something, we fall into this false assumption that we actually know it. And even though, names are a good way to be able to express to someone else what it is that we're talking about. But I want people to develop this sense of, well, what qualities are there in the world around us? And when we let go of naming something, we also let go of this idea of, if we want to make a stone arrow point, it has to be obsidian or it has to be chert or something that we've named. So it's like, well, if we want to make an arrow point, we need to know that the stone that we're working has a certain quality. It needs to be able to hold an edge, so it needs to be tight grained and not too porous. So I want people to learn in the beginning how to let go, but also how to just start to observe and experience the qualities of the world around us. So I start with basic things like how to work stone and how to work with plant fibers and how to generate fire from friction usually. So these are my cornerstones. So I will take a group down to the river. I won't have a big pile of perfect napping rock right there that they'll then wonder which place on the earth they would have to go to in order to get the right thing. So I'll go down to the river, and there's usually a river near people, and if not, it could be a dry stream bed, but you can go anywhere on the earth and you can find some stone. And we'll sit down there by the river, and I'll have them just pick up a couple of stones. And I'll say, okay, let's just sit in a circle. Let's tap these stones together. And we'll start a rhythm, and we might start a song, and there's no conscious analysis of these stones, but we might just get into that groove as a little group, and have fun with it. And then we'll have a look at the stones. And some people will find that their stones have broken in half, or some of them might find that they've crumbled away and there's powder, or some of them might find that there was color in their stone. So then I'll just send them off and have them explore on a lithic journey just there with the stone that's available in that place. And I'll say, okay, start striking the stones. Listen to the sounds that they make. Do they have a high pitch? Do they have a low pitch? Are they grainy? Do they crumble? Do they powder? Do they give color? Look at the shape. Feel the texture. Smell them. Taste them. Stone can have flavor, right? We often don't think about that, but I mean, salt is a really good example of that. And stones have scent. And the scent of something can give you an inkling as to what might lie hidden, buried within. And it doesn't matter what it's called. You don't need to be a geologist for this. You don't need to have book knowledge for that. It's like go and experience with your senses these elements. So we'll start with stone, and we'll learn what kind of stone qualities will make a good knife or cutter, what will make a good abrader, what might have a spark buried within it. And then we'll go and move on into the plant world, and we'll discover what qualities are in the plants, where the fibers are, which ones are strong, which ones are weak, what can be used for a bowstring, what could be used for a thick cord for tying up a shelter, for example, And again, it's like, it doesn't matter what it's called. It's like, learn these qualities, So I'll have people tie a knot in anything that they see around them. What happens if you tie a knot in this plant? Does it hold the knot or does it break? And therefore we find also qualities in fibers around us. And then that third cornerstone, it's probably the most magical thing because it's what sets us apart as humans from the other animals. Because there's quite a few tool makers in the animal kingdom, but there are not any other fire makers, deliberate fire makers. So then we will explore the element of fire. And like I said, the fire can be hidden in the rocks. If you strike some rocks together, you can create a spark. The fire is also hidden within the wood of the trees. And they're not all the same. There's different densities within some trees, and there's different qualities. You need to have the quality of dryness. You have to find the qualities of density in order to unleash the sparks that lay hidden within. So that's how I kind of start my program, in that triangle of basic skills. And once we've kind of gotten out of that mindset of needing to know how to name everything and starting to explore with our senses the qualities of the earth and the world around us, then we might get into more alchemical processes of mixing and matching. And I think one of the most beautiful ones of that is to take the element of earth in the form of clay, damp clay mixed with the element of water, and shaping it into a vessel. Then with the element of air, that vessel dries. Then with the element of fire, we harden it and transform it into something else that won't go back into soft clay. And then again, with the element of air, we will cool it. And then you can add the element of water back into it. And this time, instead of going into a soft, muddy lump, it will actually hold water, and you can set it upon the element of fire and cook your food. And this cycle exemplifies and really illustrates so beautifully the cyclical nature of the world and the earth and who we are and can be again in it. We'll play with pottery, we'll make baskets. Containers are a really big thing. We'll explore what foods can we eat out in the wilds. And we need to do all of those things with a consciousness of giving back and not just taking. In our culture, it's very much a exploitation culture that we're raised with. And many people, modern urban people especially, haven't been raised in this culture of, keeping health within nature, and it's been so exploited. So that's also something that's, developed for me over the years as you spend more and more time in a place and you get to go back and look at the gathering grounds. It's like we're not just taking from the ground, but the way we're a keystone species, and the way we move across and harvest from the land can actually be beneficial to the land. And that's not something that I think we just learn in one season. This is where it starts to go back for many, many generations. This is the Indigenous wisdom that has been nearly destroyed all over the place. And so we need to resurrect that. And the only way to do that, you can't do that in a course of 1 year. You can't do it in a week. You can get a little inkling to it, but you can't learn that. I mean, it takes many generations to really, really know that. But, in 15 or 20 years, you can start to get an idea of what that might mean if you're belonging in one place and seeing the regeneration year after year. What happens if the wildfire goes through? What happens if there's a flood? What happens if there's a drought? And gradually we get a bigger picture. And of course, if our generations are able to speak down through the ages, then that picture is enormous, the connection. We're building all of these things from a very basic level. So with containers and gathering food, of course, comes up then the concept of eating protein. And being a northern person and living in the north where we have cold, long winters, if you think about Indigenous peoples of the north, they were largely carnivores. It's very hard to survive as a vegetarian if you're out on the Arctic tundra, and most of what there is to eat comes in the form of something that runs or swims or flies. So we'll start to dig into how to obtain proteins through hunting and fishing, and we'll build bows. Again, using those same concepts of what quality of wood do we need, something that's elastic but can compress on the inside in order to build a bow and to make arrows. What woods will hold straight through many firings. And then hunting itself, we're not talking about hunting with high-powered rifles or even compound bows where you can see an animal 100 yards away and still take a shot. No, you have to learn the habits of the animals too, or with trapping. It's sort of infinite, really, the details. And I feel like, we only sort of scratched the surface, really, to what Indigenous wisdom actually knew after many generations. But we'll build bows, we'll learn how to shoot them, we'll learn how to make the sound choices that are not going to leave an animal wounded in the forest. And we'll make fishing line and hooks and nets and all of these things too, to be able to harvest from the lakes and streams. Mostly I'm teaching inland, so I'm not really a coastal person, but there's multitudes of options if you can go to the coast, and that's obviously always been a very abundant place. The coastal areas where you can harvest seafood, and that's something that I feel like I'm still working towards with my projects in the last few years. I've been focusing on mountain to ocean, so I'm starting to delve into what it means to come to the coast and have the plethora of coastal vegetation and foods that can't run away with you and are stuck to the rocks. So what more do we use and do in our preparations for our projects? Then there's the big thing about hide tanning. Once you've learned how to harvest animals, then we need to be able to process them, to be able to take food with us, some dried meat, for example, to be able to render the fat, to be able to take off the hides and to tan those hides and then turn them into functional, durable, and beautiful clothing. So that's a big part of it. Actually, some of the biggest parts is actually the tanning of hides and the production of clothing and bedding for when we go out on our projects. So food and clothing are probably the things that take up the most time in our preparation periods, because it takes a minimum of about 8 deer hides to clothe oneself with a full layer on the legs and arms, and that's not necessarily going to keep you really warm either. We do both buckskin clothing with the hair off, and then I usually teach fur tanning too, so that people can make hats and vests and have some warm layer that traps a lot of air in there. And then they need to have a bed as well, so it starts to look like, wow, to tan a buffalo robe, that might take a week of really hard labor, and to tan 8 buckskins, you're looking at a month of hard physical work. And then to sew them all up into clothes, there's another 2 weeks. So, it's impossible to try and do something like this and not have the time to actually go through all of these processes. So it's rewarding and intensive.
That's the voice of Lynx Vilden. I'm sitting with Lynx in the forest outside the Between the Rivers gathering. Lynx is a hands-on wilderness living skills educator. And when we come back, we're going to learn about her book, Return, A Journey Back to Living Wild, and what it might look like once they take all of this gear and tools that they've created over a period of months out into the wilderness. But Lynx, now it's time for another song. You mentioned one of your mentors earlier, Dave Holliday, who I was able to meet and connect with at the Winter Count gathering a few years back, and you mentioned a song.
Yeah, the first Winter Count gathering I went to was in 1994, I think, or maybe it was 95. I don't remember which year exactly. And that's where I met Dave Holliday, and I was completely enamored in this wild man who could pick up something and turn it into something useful and functional. So I was very much inspired over the years, and he became a good friend, and we worked together for quite a few years too down in Utah when I was working at Boulder Outdoor Survival School. And I have this recollection. I went to winter camp many, many times, and I have this one recollection of I had some viral thing. So I was lying in my tent feeling not very well, congested and headachy, and it was late at night. And at these gatherings, well, even if you do camp far away, you can still usually hear the drumming and the singing and the beautiful things going on around the fire pit. And everything went quiet for a little while. And then I heard this song. And I was far enough away that I couldn't hear the words, but I could hear the rapture. It was like you can hear the rapture in the silence of the listeners with just this voice. And so I was like, I have to be there, and I felt pretty terrible. So I kind of crawled out of my tent and staggered to the edge of the firelight. And there's David Holliday. And he's walking around the fire and he's singing this song. And it was so mesmerizing. It was so beautiful. Oh, it almost just brings me tears just thinking back to it. So I don't know if I'll get through the song.
You don't have to.
I'll give it a try. He made it into a song. It's the poem by Robert Service. It's called The Call of the Wild. He said, well, for me to remember all the words of a long poem, I have to have music to it. So he had created this melody. So I hope I can do it justice. Have you gazed on naked grandeur when there's nothing else to gaze on? Set pieces and drop curtain scenes galore. Big mountains heave to heaven that the blinding sunsets blaze on. Black canyons where the rapids rip and roar. Have you swept the visioned valley with the green stream streaking through it? Search the vastness for something you have lost. Have you strung your soul to silence? Then for God's sake, go and do it. Hear the challenge, learn the lesson, pay the cost. Have you wandered in the wilderness, the sagebrush desolation, the bunch grass levels where the cattle graze? Have you whistled bits of ragtime at the end of all creation and learned to know the desert's little ways? Have you camped upon the foothills? Have you galloped o'er the ranges? Have you roamed the arid sunlands through and through? Have you chummed up with the mesa? Do you know its moods and changes? Then listen to the wild, it's calling you. Have you known the great white silence, not a snow-gemmed twig quiver? Eternal truths that shame as soothing lies. Have you broken trail on snowshoes, mushed your huskies up the river, dared the unknown, led the way, and clutched the prize? Have you marked the map's void spaces, mingled with the mongrel races, known the savage strength of brute in every thew? The simple things, the true things, the silent men who do things. Then listen to the wild, it's calling you. Have you seen God in his splendor, heard the text that nature renders? You never hear it in the family pew. They have cradled you in custom, they have primed you with their preaching, they have soaked you in convention through and through. They have put you in a showcase, you're a credit to their teaching. But can you hear the wild? It's calling you. Let us search the silent places. Let us seek what luck betide us. Let us journey to a lonely land. I know there's a whisper on the night wind. There's a star, a gleam to guide us. And the wild is calling, calling. Let us go.
I'd love if you could highlight some of those aspects of actually being out with the Stone Age tools and gear. And then I would, of course, like to talk to you about your book.
When you were saying that, several moments came up in my mind of being out on project, as we call it, when we don't have all of these backup plans. And it makes me think of one time we've been sitting by the fire that night and we had created a camp. Of course, you have to create a camp long before dark, and you have to be able to cook the food, you have to make the bow drill fire, you have to either set up a shelter or find a good place to be sheltered and watching the sky. And we were sitting there in the dark, and the weather pattern had been oftentimes there would be rain at some point during the day or night, so we were kind of prepared for that. We'd spent some hours making some shelter, and now we were finishing up with our dinner, sitting around the fire. And it was really dark. And what I'll often do, if we're in a base camp where we're staying for sometimes up to 10 days, we usually move camp after about 10 days, not more than 2 weeks, certainly. I will sometimes take off my shoes in the day and walk my way back to my camp from the main fire in my bare feet, because you can start to feel the little pathways that you've generated doing the back and forth over the days, but you can't feel it with moccasins on. So I will walk it in the daylight so I can feel it my way back at night, because sometimes we're in thick forest and you can make a little fat lamp and kind of carry it and see your way, but a lot of times it's very, very dark, and if there's no moon and you're in the thick forest, it's almost impossible to find your way back unless you've gone through it, studied it. It's like, okay, you take off your moccasins and you feel there's the path, it's a little bit softer there. Oh, if you get off to the side, there's the bushes. It's like, no, take a step back, and you feel your way. So there was this one time we were camped on the side of the river, and the camp we had built was back up into the trees, and it started to spit rain, and we could hear there was a thunderstorm rolling in. We could hear it coming. It was like, okay, it's time to go back to camp right now. And we hadn't been camped there for a long time, so we didn't have a determined trail already. And in the daylight, it would probably take about 3 minutes to walk back to the camp. So we all got up, and it's pitch black, and it's like, okay, well, we know that it's away from the water. If we walk into the water, we're going in the wrong direction. But once we got out of the circle of firelight, then it was really pitch black. But as the storm moved in, there'd be a flash of lightning. And I remember I had looked back at where our camp was, and I had memorized the shape of the trees where our camp was. So we got all in a line, we all held hands, and we were heading back to this camp, but we could only move when there was a lightning flash, because otherwise we couldn't see what direction we were going. So it would be like, there would be a flash of lightning and then a peal of thunder, and in that flash of lightning it was like, there they are. So then we would walk for a few paces in that direction, and then when it became sort of unclear again, you can't get very far, then we'd have to wait for the next flash of lightning, and the storm is coming in, so it's like, the rain starts pattering to start off with. It's like, we got to get back there before it really unleashes its fury. And we didn't have clocks or watches, of course, so we couldn't tell how long it took us to get back, but that 3 or 4 minute walk became more like a 15-minute walk, where we could only really move forward when there was a flash of lightning and we could see which direction to go. And we did manage to get back to our shelter before it really came down on us. But these kinds of things, nobody thinks about that today. What was our safety plan? If there's a forest fire, what's our safety plan? Somebody gets injured, what's our safety plan? Well, the safety plan is knowing and trusting your clan members that they'll get you out. Fortunately, we've never had a situation where we've had to emergency evacuate someone. You depend on your relationship to each other, your understanding and relationship to the earth, and you learn things that we don't even consider in this modern world, because we don't have headlamps, we don't have telephones, Our medical supplies are knowing which plants to use if you get stung by a wasp, and knowing what will quell blood flow if you have a wound or if you have a burn. I guess most of the medical issues we had or out there during those times were small things like cuts and scrapes on the feet especially, or burns from the fire. And occasionally we've had, like stomach upsets or diarrhea from somebody that got bad water and things like that. But my insurance to all that has been a lot of prayer that we will all stay well, and a lot of trust in our knowledge as a group and trust in each other.
Lynx, when we say Stone Age, how many thousands of years back are we talking-ish?
We can split the Stone Age up into 3 segments, basically. There's the Paleolithic, which was the vast majority of it. And, if we take that back to early hominids in Africa, we're looking at a million years, not as Homo sapiens necessarily, but our predecessors. Paleolithic people were using tools, early hominids used tools, and that might be up to a million years ago, I guess, or I'm not very good at numbers either. And then you got the Mesolithic, the Middle Stone Age, and then the Neolithic. And there were, of course, many revolutionary changes during these times up to agriculture, the onset, the advent of agriculture approximately, 10,000 years ago. And many of these changes happened in the Neolithic, where, for example, creating pottery, like we make pots out of clay, and that's a relatively new technique. And so, my style is definitely not Paleolithic. We do learn, of course, Paleolithic techniques for working stone, for example, that ancient ancestors would have used. But we make pottery and we work our skins in ways and tailor them in very modern ways. I'm not really stuck on reproduction or replication of a particular time period. I'm much more interested in, here we are today, we're modern humans in this environment. What does nature have to offer us, and how can we utilize it to create our comfort and meet our needs?
Lynx, you are the author of the book Return, A Journey Back to Living Wild. Can you tell us a little bit about this book?
I mentioned earlier how in my youth I was involved with the arts, and one of the things that I loved to do was writing, and I wrote journals. I think I started writing my first journals when I was a preteen, something like that, 11 or 12 years old, and documenting my daily activities and so on. So, my love for writing started long time ago, and I started writing stories as a youth and teenager. And I continued the journaling practice throughout my life. It's not like I keep a daily journal, but I started to travel a lot as a late teen, and I'd quit art school and theatre school, and I started to get my education from traveling around the world, and I was always very drawn and intrigued by Indigenous communities that were still left. Because of my Swedish heritage, I was taken up to the Arctic and spent some time with the Sami people. That was my sort of initiation into seeing how there are still Indigenous cultures with very different practices. So while I was up in the north there, I would write my journals, or when I was traveling and getting new experiences, I would write my journals. And in about 1999, I started a practice that was, what do I want to create in my life? So I would write lists of the things that I wanted to do in my life, and I would write it in the way that it would sort of manifest itself. So it was like, okay, I wrote a book. I think I wrote down something like that more than 20 years ago. And actually, it was only about 5 years ago maybe that my daughter Clara has been a bit of an agent for me, because she's very good at navigating this modern world in quite the same way that she can. But so we managed to compile all of these journals of the travels and the Stone Age projects that I'd taken my students out with, and we'd sort of put them together. It's like, okay, we actually have a volume of something here, but it's disjointed. And so several years ago, someone came out and took a program for a week, and they were a journalist from the New York Times, and they wrote an article in the New York Times. And suddenly a lot of people were sending me emails. And I had some literary agents at that moment who wrote to me and said, have you ever thought about writing a book? I was like, yes, as a matter of fact, I have a whole lot of material that's been written over the last 20 years. And they said, great, let's read some. So I sent them a little bit and signed a contract with them. I was introduced to the idea of the whole publicity world today, which is very different. I thought you just wrote a book and sent it off to publishers, but that's not how it works anymore. So anyway, we put together a proposal and it got taken by a large publishing company, Harper One, imprint of HarperCollins. And I spent the last 2 years writing this book, putting it together in a way that made sense but wasn't conventional. I think like much of my life, I've wanted to not follow the conventional path, or maybe I can't follow the conventional path, I'm not quite sure. But it came together beautifully with the help of some great editors and really good people on the team. And I'm very pleased to have had this book come out in April. And so it's very fresh still. I loved the fact that I was really given full rein to put it in the way I really wanted to. And I didn't want to make it this linear concept, so it's got this sort of spiral element. It's in 4 parts: lost, searching, transformation, and revelation. And so I can circle around. It's a memoir, essentially, but with a lot of aspects of Indigenous wisdom from the tribes that I've spent time with and the peoples that I've spent time with around the world, and also my Stone Age projects with my various students and the challenges that we've been subject to and overcome some of. And I wanted to sort of create an archetypal group of students, so I've taken pieces from various students and morphed them into fictional characters on a trip that we basically did do. One of the later trips where we had figured out a lot of the details and challenges and had learned to work together in a more harmonious manner. The story, it touches on elements from my childhood and my yearning, as many of us urban people do, for something that you couldn't quite put your finger on somehow. It's like, well, something is missing, but I don't know what it is.
Lynx, this is a radio show, and the people listening can't imagine where we're sitting today. And I could say that looking over at you, it's early morning, and you've got these beautiful bright blue eyes that are lit up by the sun, and you're wrapped in your coyote coat. And I love the word that you said yesterday. You said the aesthetics of the people around here, at least at this gathering, is a lot of buckskin and fur and not a lot of plastics. I really like the aesthetics, what you're saying when you're out there and you're drinking out of a clay pot that you made yourself and not leaving behind any rubbish. This concept of when you do leave something behind, maybe it's just a scrap of obsidian or a broken piece of pottery or a scrap of buckskin. And that's just so beautiful. So I wanted to ask you if you could tell us what you see when you look around. Where are we sitting right now? And then end your show with 3 bits of advice for whoever is listening out there.
The sun is climbing through the trees and glinting through the trunks of the ponderosa. And I look at this forest, and I've been in real forest, I've been in ancient forest, where the trees are not more or less all the same size. So I'm aware of the fact that I'm in a young forest here, a forest that has been harvested for our use, probably again and again over the last 100 or 200 years. But there's still, even in this youthful forest, nature has its way of undauntedly replenishing itself over and over, no matter what we do. The forest floor is strewn with pine needles. And when I see those pine needles, I think about, wow, you could make a really nice bed. Scraping up a few of these pine needles, and there's some balsam root just ahead of me, and I don't just see these green leaves, I see there's a place where you can harvest shoots in the spring before the leaves have shot up, and a beautiful, tasty spring green and medicine. I see Oregon grapefruit over there. There's also medicine and berries later in the season. I just see a place that's teeming with potential, and if we were able to let it just keep living out and harvest from it in a gentle and sustainable manner. I look at this forest right now and I imagine it 100 years from now without machinery having come through it. And then I see something more diverse. There are birds singing right here, but I imagine how it will look in 100 years if it's been cared for and managed in a way that lets its full potential as its wildness can reassert itself. And I can imagine all those people down there in the meadow, the 300 or 400 people down there in the meadow, what we might look like and be if we grew with this forest for 100 years, nurturing and sustaining ourselves as human beings in our full potential. And maybe that includes, some modern technology too. I don't know what that's going to look like, but when I wrote my book, Return, I think we're not going to return to what we were, but there's aspects of returning that can give us and that can create something absolutely magnificent that we could barely even imagine.
Lynx, what bit of advice could you share with whoever's listening out there?
Yeah, that one's pretty easy. Number one, I would say take off your shoes. When you take off your shoes and you get to feel the earth and you take away that membrane of rubber that's actually insulating us from the vibrations that the earth's emitting, then something's going to enter you. And it might feel uncomfortable at first. So maybe just start off on the nice, soft lawn. Take off your shoes and feel that connection with earth. Number two, turn off your phone and put it somewhere where it's not going to bother you. Put it in a place where you're not going to instinctively reach for it because that's becoming your habit. And number three, take a friend by the hand and ask them to do the same thing. And take a little walk out into the closest thing you can find to wildness where you live, whether it's a park or a forest or a wilderness of magnificent mountains out your back door. Whatever you can find, try those things and stop talking and see what the earth has to tell you.
Lynx, thank you so much for your time and energy joining me today on The Trail Less Traveled.
Yeah, thank you. It's really been really nice to sit here with you this morning.
Hello everyone, my name is Kevin Niehaus. I'm one of the teaching naturalists for the Montana Natural History Center, where our mission is to promote and cultivate the appreciation, understanding, and stewardship of nature through education. And for my naturalist tip of the week, I've got an easy way you can always tell whether we're approaching a full moon or a new moon. When you're outside and you happen to look up and notice the moon at night, just sing to yourself, "If the light is on the right, it's getting bright. If the light is on the right, it's getting bright. If the light is on the right and the moon is out tonight, then it's heading towards a moon that's full and bright." This means if you look up and notice that the right portion of the moon is more lit up than the left side, then we're waxing towards a full moon. But if instead it's the left portion that's more lit up than the right side, well, then we're on the other end of the cycle and waning towards a new moon. Though, keep in mind, this pattern is actually reversed in the southern hemisphere. For more information, or to become a member of the Montana Natural History Center, visit montananaturalist.org. That's montananaturalist.org.
That's it for this week's adventure, my friends in Missoula and around the world. But until next week, please remember, conservation is not a spectator sport. Living in Missoula is a privilege. With privilege comes responsibility. Please get educated and engaged. Speak up on behalf of wildlife and wild places. And if you think you're too small to make a difference, well then you've never spent the night with a mosquito.